My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. And I'm hoping that this endeavor will encourage us all to be better consumers of cinema. Today, I'll be reading through a review from Slate titled, "Why So Serious?" and written by Jonathan L. Fischer. The link to this review is in the video description below if you'd like to follow along and read it for yourself, and I encourage you to do this. And if Jonathan should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and I would like to ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comment section would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the tone and approach to the franchise were both changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse. And before I get into Jonathan's thoughts, I'm sure there are people out there who are like, what do you know, Rebecca? Who cares about your opinion? What do you have to say? Well, to those people, that's a legitimate question. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on me, and then we'll get into the review. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life, I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. All right, now with that out of the way, let's get into Jonathan L. Fischer's review of Batman v Superman. So we like to always kind of start at the beginning. I think that's a good place to start. So one of the ways that we can do that is to look at the headline or title of the review. And this one from Slate, the title is "Why So Serious?" ? Which I find always, it's always timely and relevant to use a quote from another Batman movie that was released 8 years before this one. So I think it's, that might have been cool back in 2008, 2009, but 8 years later, I don't know if it's still very relevant. Jonathan is trying to make commentary on the humor and how serious Batman v Superman takes itself. So we'll read more about that as we go into the review, but I don't know, maybe be a little more creative. It's a little 8 years too late to maybe use that. But I think his notion was Batman was in that movie, was in that film, The Dark Knight, and Batman is in Batman v Superman. So I guess there's his connection. I guess he thought it was kind of clever, but I think it's a little outdated and too easy. So if I was his editor, I would try a little harder. Maybe not go at the first draft. But in all seriousness, why couldn't Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice be serious? Who says it shouldn't? What if the filmmaker wanted it to be that way? Maybe that is the exact tone that Zack Snyder was going for. So I don't know why reviewers, and this seems to come up quite a bit, but I don't know why the reviewer is dictating the tone and the direction of the film instead of the filmmaker. I think the filmmaker, as someone who is sometimes a creative person who does creative things, I don't want someone else judging my stuff to tell me what to do. I should be the one to dictate the tone and the approach to what I do. So I think that's a little strange that reviewers do that, but it does seem to come up quite a bit. There's also a secondary part of this title, which reads, Batman v Superman spends so much time teasing later installments that it forgets to have any fun. So my question here is, does it really spend so much time, or does it just spend a few minutes doing this? I'm pretty sure Jonathan is referring to possibly both the nightmare sequence and the short montage of the Justice League members there towards the end of the film. So I don't know if I would classify that as so much time when it's actually not that long, especially in a 2.5 hour film. Also, I have a question about this. What dictates the word fun to Jonathan? What does that mean to him? Because I personally had fun watching BVS, so I don't understand how the film forgets to have fun. I think there are plenty of fun moments in it, personally, just in my opinion. So I would be curious to know what Jonathan's idea of fun is. And I guess we'll have to read further on down to find out if he mentions that in this review. So he starts off his actual review. So we just looked at the headlines. So we're going to get into the review. He writes, quote, "For critics and fans who snagged a seat at the advanced screening this week, the latest Superman movie came with an unusual preamble. A video message from director Zack Snyder begging the audience not to post any spoilers on Twitter or Facebook. Hey, fair enough," unquote. Yeah, I think that's 100% and totally fair. It's a director asking the critics and the people who see it early to try and preserve surprises for the audience. In a digital age where you can spoil anything with a hashtag, I have accidentally done this myself. I know it happens all the time. If you don't want to be spoiled about anything, don't go on Twitter. Don't go on Instagram. It happens all the time. So the fact that Zack Snyder knew this and knew that he wanted to preserve things like the Flash scene where he comes into the Batcave, like the nightmare sequence, like those little teases of the Justice League, like Superman's death. Those are big things that I think he, as a director, wanted the audience to have the opportunity to experience for themselves. And I actually appreciate that as a director trying to preserve that experience for me. So I appreciate that. So I think it is 100% fair. I agree with Jonathan that he says, hey, fair enough. I agree, Jonathan, 100%. So he continues on with, quote, with a title so clunky and focus grouped, it might as well be written in Kryptonian. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice isn't merely a sequel to 2013's Man of Steel. It's an event, a blockbuster showdown between two iconic superheroes and one of the most expensive marketing vehicles of all time. A sense-numbing, joy-bludgeoning, soul-deadening 152-minute trailer designed to kickstart for DC Comics the kind of malignant, obscenely lucrative superhero empire that Iron Man, Captain America, and the Avengers have gifted Marvel and Disney. Holy crap, what a paragraph. Okay, so we need to break this down. That was a lot, and I'm pretty sure that that was possibly a run-on sentence of the highest order there. So we'll try to see if we can break this down. So I personally agree that the title of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is clunky. I would agree. I think there was probably a better title out there. Zack Snyder actually did have another title that he wanted to go with. So, but I think that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was probably the best compromise that he could have with the studio. They could have their Batman versus Superman in there that they wanted and the public wanted for a long time, while also guaranteeing the public that, by the end of the film, Batman and Superman, they're going to be friends by the end of it. So the fact that they have Dawn of Justice in there not only says that perhaps Superman and Batman are going to be friends by the end, but it also guarantees possibly, I guess guarantee and possibly is not the same thing. It guarantees an inevitable Justice League moment. So I think that's the best of both worlds in there. I guess that was kind of the best compromise that they could have. And the thing about titles of films, I sometimes don't care, honestly, if it's at least good enough. I don't really nitpick that kind of thing, because titles really, it doesn't really dictate the quality of a film. It doesn't dictate, what happens in it. So a title for me is like, okay, that's the title of the film. Great. Let's move on. I want to watch it. So it's not, they don't give out awards for like best film title. So I honestly don't care. I'm sure it could have been better, and they probably should have kept workshopping it, but it's not going to make or break anything to me. And I don't honestly, it doesn't bother me at all. Okay. So he also talks about Kryptonian in here. I talk about Kryptonians all the time. I am a co-host of a podcast called Supergirl Radio. We also talk about the Kryptonian language quite a bit. I'm actually kind of an amateur Kryptonese. I dabble in Kryptonese quite a bit. I like to translate Kryptonese when it pops up on the Supergirl TV series or in the comics. And Kryptonese is the title of the Kryptonian language. Sometimes it gets used interchangeably. For me personally, I use Kryptonese when it is written and Kryptonian when you're referring it to the language. So I would not have said written in Kryptonian. I know this is kind of a really nerdy nitpick, but if he was going to say written in the Kryptonian language, I would have said written in Kryptonese. But he may not know that. But we're going to find out. Jonathan is a comics expert. He's been a lifelong fan of comics, so you would think that he would know this. But it's used as Kryptonian here. Just a nitpick, moving on. Okay, so he says in this section, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice isn't merely a sequel to 2013's Man of Steel. It's an event, a blockbuster showdown between two iconic superheroes. This is something I agree with 100%. Although I don't understand why the word event is capitalized. I don't know the editorial choice for that. It has no real. It's not a proper. What is that? It's supposed to be a proper noun or something. I don't know why is that capitalized. So if I was the editor, I would have not done that. I would have just had event as lowercase because it doesn't make sense to capitalize it there. I also, if I was the editor, I would have broken some of this up. And here is my correction of this really long run-on sentence, and I'll try to emphasize my punctuation edits because I would have put some punctuations in different places. I would have done, quote, it's an event, a blockbuster showdown between two iconic superheroes and one of the most expensive marketing vehicles of all time, period. Batman v Superman is a sense-numbing, joy-bludgeoning, and soul-deadening 152-minute trailer designed to kickstart a cinematic universe for DC Comics. Period. They'd like the kind of malignant, obscenely lucrative superhero empire that Iron Man, Captain America, and the Avengers have gifted Marvel and Disney. Period. In addition to my grammar and punctuation corrections, I have a couple of questions. First one, what is sense-numbing about BVS? I'd like to know. I don't really get an example in there. I also want to know what's joy-bludgeoning about it. Don't have an example. What about soul deadening? That's a really intense description there. So I would really love to have some examples of the way that Batman v Superman does all of these things and embodies all of these descriptions. But sadly, we don't have any examples given there. So I guess we're just going to have to assume things, but we don't have any further description. I'm going to hang out in the chat for a second just to catch up and see what some people are saying in here. It looks like Dennis is saying The Dark Knight wasn't serious at all. Yeah, it's probably one of the most serious superhero films ever made. It has the Joker in there, and he's kind of a fun in a dark, twisted way. In a very twisted, make you uncomfortable kind of way. But for the most part, it's a very serious film. I mean, Rachel Dawes dies at the end. A lot of very heavy stakes for Bruce in that film. He ends up, being somebody who's being hunted by the GCPD. So it's not like a comic, a comedic, laugh a minute ride. It's one of the most serious films of all time in the superhero genre. Let's see. Dennis also says criticizing BVS for not being like Marvel. It's like criticizing Saving Private Ryan for not being like Platoon. Yeah, I personally try to stay away from comparisons when I'm looking at films or TV shows because it's just not fair to them because they're unless they're a sequel or something like that, trying to fit into the same kind of universe or like a trilogy or something like that. They're probably not trying to be like another film. So I kind of think that is unfair. Let's see. And yeah, Dennis also says every Marvel movie is a trailer for the next one. So that's kind of hypocritical if he likes Marvel movies, of course. We're gonna get there. We are gonna get there because that is gonna come up. We're gonna have to wait until the end of the review, but we will get there. And so I think by the end of it, Jonathan is going to give himself away a little bit here. But yeah, I do personally think it's a little hypocritical, and we will get more into that. So, okay. All right. Let's hop back into the review. Jonathan writes, quote, pace Snyder. I don't know if he's telling Snyder to pace himself. I don't know. He just says, pace Snyder, Batman v Superman isn't packed with spoilers so much as it is stuffed with teasers. The kind of cameos and set pieces clearly designed to entice customers to pay to see the next 3 or 4 Justice League films, not help them enjoy this one. It might be, this is a big claim. He writes, it might be the most teaser-dense film ever made, unquote. Okay, so I find it very interesting. We've read through several of these reviews now. But these top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, these reviewers really latched on to the short Justice League member teases in Batman v Superman, as if that wasn't just a blip on the radar of an extensive film that had a lot of other things going on. that short, like, and I'm assuming that what he's talking about, the teases, are, like I said, the Nightmare sequence and the Justice League stuff. And they're relatively short compared to the rest of the film. So I find it interesting that a lot of the criticism about Batman v Superman are these teases, when Marvel did this all the time and they're still kind of doing it. And so I don't understand why that's a big issue. And then B, there's not much there when you compare it to the total runtime of the film. I do wonder, and I know this came up in the chat, if Jonathan would have an issue with how the MCU designs their movies to, quote, entice customers to pay to see the next 3 or 4 movies. Because that's kind of all the MCU movies exist to do. I mean, did anybody go into Thor: The Dark World? Because I mean, maybe somebody did. Maybe somebody is a real big Thor fan. And they're like, oh, I can't wait to see the next Thor movie. Or were they just going to see Thor: The Dark World to get to the next post-credit sequence? It's a question. It's just a question I have. So the Marvel movies pumped all those movies out, and they all had those credit teases in there to lead people into the next film. So I think that's it's interesting that Jonathan doesn't even mention that here. And when he claims teaser dense film ever made, that's quite the claim, honestly. There's one sequence foreshadowing the Nightmare World, and it actually ties into the overall story that's being told about Batman's fear of Superman and his paranoia about things, and it ties all of that in while also at the same time being able to foreshadow what would have come if we had gotten more of the Snyderverse. And then that montage of the Justice League members, it lasts less than 3 minutes in a 2.5-hour film. Less than 3 minutes. That's all there is. It's not even that much. So I think that's really over exaggerated. What a hyperbolic statement to say it's the what does he say? The teaser and the most teaser dense film ever made. I don't know about that. I just don't know about that. We'll continue on. So Jonathan says, quote, to put it delicately, this comics fan, he's talking about himself, hated Batman v Superman with the fury of 1,000 red dwarf suns. So Jonathan, as a comics fan, hated BVS. Fair enough. We all have our opinions. We all think different things and have different perspectives. So what? I'm a comic book fan. And I loved it with all the kittens and heart eye emojis and the red dwarf sunshines that you can think of. I loved it. He didn't. It doesn't matter if you're a comic book fan or not. Even if you are a comic book fan, you're allowed to love it. So just because he says, well, I'm a comic book fan, it doesn't matter. Like, that doesn't matter to me. I think it's so funny. It's like, well, you're a comic book fan, you hated it. Well, I'm a comic book fan, I loved it. That's not telling me much. So I think there's got to be a better argument than that. But we'll continue on to see if there is. Let's see. Jonathan calls Batman v Superman blunt, humorless, and baffling. I think Perry White has something to say about that.
Crime wave in Gotham. Other breaking news. Water wet.
I mean, humorless? We've gone over this. I actually, I clipped out a segment from a previous live stream that I did about the humor in Batman v Superman. I've linked it below if you want to share that to people who say there was no humor in the movie. If people say, well, it was just humorless. Well, I've given you some examples of some humor, so we don't have to revisit that. But I did clip that out if you did want to get into some of that again. He also calls it blunt. I would like some more, explanation about what Jonathan means by blunt. What does he mean by this? He also calls it baffling. Again, how? Why? Why is it baffling? I would love to know more about that. So Jonathan also says, quote, "It collides the brutish directorial stamp of Zack Snyder, he of 300 and Watchmen fame, with the most shameless instincts of our latter-day superhero franchise bubble." Shameless instincts. What does he mean by this? I would love to know more about what he's talking about when he refers to shameless instincts of our latter-day superhero franchise bubble. I don't think Jonathan goes into it any more than that, but he drops it in for some reason. So I don't really know what he means by that. If anybody in the chat or anybody in the comment section thinks they know what he means, I would sure appreciate your thoughts. Jonathan also goes on to say, quote, "It is worse than..." This is quite the statement. "It is worse," and he's talking about Batman v Superman here. "It is worse than the widely detested Joel Schumacher Batman films, including the one with bat nipples," unquote. So first off, I'm pretty sure that both of the Schumacher Batman movies had bat nipples. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was the case. That was Joel Schumacher's whole aesthetic for the bat suits. But aside that nitpick, yeah, this is a real claim from a top critic of Rotten Tomatoes. He thinks that BVS is worse than Batman and Robin. That's mind-blowing to me. I can't take that seriously whatsoever. That is not, in my opinion, a serious statement. But Jonathan never explains why that is. Why is it worse than Batman and Robin? Please go into detail. Thank you. Let's see. Jonathan also says, quote, "It is probably worse than the never filmed Superman movie starring Nicolas Cage would have been," unquote. It's probably worse. Are we speculating on a comparison to a film that was never actually made and released? That is a new one. That is new to me. That film was never actually made. They did some costume stuff and some concept designs, but we're just guessing that it would have been worse than another movie that was never made. What? Well, how do you make that leap? Also, I've watched the documentary film titled "The Death of Superman Lives: What Happened," and the Nicolas Cage version could have actually, in my opinion, been pretty interesting. Tim Burton is admittedly one of my favorite directors, so I'm probably pretty biased, but I wish I could have, seen the spider version of Brainiac. And Nicolas Cage's Superman suit had all these like cool lights all over it, and that would have actually been really interesting. Some of the stuff that they showed in that documentary with it probably would have been a little weird. I mean, it's Tim Burton, so some of that is kind of a little weird and a little creepy. But you know what? I would have given it a shot. I would have seen what they had to do with it. Nicolas Cage is, a very passionate Superman fan, so I would have definitely given it a shot to see what they would have come up with. So it blows my mind that a film critic would speculate on whether or not a film would have been worse than a film that doesn't exist. That really is a new one to me. That's a new argument to me. All right. I'm going to hop in the chat real quick and take comments, and I will see what everybody else has to say. So Ash, I think 790 says, "All those critics really love to hear themselves talk and perorate." I'm not familiar with that word. I hope I pronounced it correctly, but it's all hyperbolic and devoid of meaning when you look closer. Yeah, I'm discovering that a lot with these reviews as I revisit them. I read them 5 years ago, and now I'm reading them again, and it doesn't make any more sense than the first time I read through them. But they do seem to say a lot of things, but they don't back up anything they say. And a lot of times it's wrong. It's either incorrect or misleading, and they don't seem to care. That's the thing that is mind-boggling to me, is that they don't care to be right. They don't care to be correct. They don't care to be representing the film as it actually is. It's like the film that's in their mind instead of what's actually happening. And I honestly don't know how they get away with this. I don't. I don't know how they live with themselves either, because I shouldn't say usually. I all the time will, even if I don't like something, I try to represent either a film or a TV show. I try to represent it in the light in which it presents itself. I don't try to make up something. I don't exaggerate. I try not to exaggerate as much as I can. I try to just look at it for what it is. And these people don't do that. And it's mind-boggling to me what they get away with, because they could write anything. All these reviews are coming out before the film is released. So they're not open to criticism or correction afterwards, because they've already come out and they've done their job. And so nobody corrects them. So I think that's, maybe I guess some people do correct them in comment sections. I try not to look at the comment sections of anything, except for here on these videos, because the people who hang out in my live chat in the comment section are usually, great people. But I guess you have the ability to correct someone then. But by then they don't care. They've gotten their words out, and they've had the ability and the opportunity to affect a film the way they want to affect it as a reviewer. And so after that's out, I don't think they care anymore. So I think it's a real disservice, and it's kind of negligent, in my opinion, for them to do this kind of thing. So yeah, it's wild to me. Let's see. Dennis says, it's worse than Batman and Robin. Well, considering Batman and Robin is pretty close in tone to the MCU, he probably likes it. That may be the case. They're fun. They're fun movies. I mean, Batman and Robin, like, ice skate around. I mean, that's fun, I guess. So that's something to be investigated. Okay, so Ash says, perorate. I'd have to perorate, I guess is how you say that, means to talk a lot. And oh man, Ash 790, you're giving me some big words today. I've got to expand my vocabulary anyway. Thank you for this. In grandiloquent or self-important or in an arrogant manner. So thank you for clarifying what that is about. All right. So also Sumitra says, this top critic claims a philosophical superhero movie like BVS is worse than today's comedy superhero circus movies. That's a great point, actually, Sumitra, that these are two different films. They both have Batman in them, but they are intentionally different in tone. They're intentionally different in story. They're intentionally different in interpretation of the characters. So to compare them is just unfair and not good, I guess is the best way to say that. Sumitra also says BBS had character depth, which actually inspired people in their real lives. Yeah, so I think it's weird that there's this need to compare, just to, I guess, give them something to write so that they can fill out their word count, I guess. So, all right, let's keep going back into the review and see what else Jonathan has to say. So he writes, quote, if Christopher Reeve is spinning in his grave right now, it's not because Snyder's film so egregiously ignores what might make a Superman film special, though it does! Exclamation point. Okay, so who says that Zack Snyder ignores what makes a Superman film special? I guess Jonathan is making that case here. But he doesn't really go into why that is and what makes a Superman film special. I'll put that to the chat in the comment section. What do you think makes a Superman film special? And do you think that Zack Snyder ignored it? I also have the question of what if I think that Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice captures Superman on film and embodies what makes a Superman film special? What if I think that's correct? Does that make what Jonathan says incorrect? Because, for example, with BVS, Superman, he's supposed to be a beacon of hope, right? Well, by the end of the film, he inspires the citizens of Metropolis to see themselves and each other as heroes in his absence. It's also, I think, BVS is also very reverent to Superman, especially when it comes to the death of Superman. It treats that as very weighty and important, and has a lot of respect that is paid to Superman and Clark Kent. So I think it does a pretty good job of capturing what makes a Superman film special. So I guess I would be curious as to what other people think of that. But it's just interesting to me. Like, Jonathan can make that claim, and I can make the other claim. And then it's like, well, who's correct here if we're both disagreeing? I guess we all have our opinions, but you can just say anything. Like, you're not backing that up with any kind of evidence or examples from the film that you can back up your statement and your case for. Let's see. Jonathan continues on, quote, "But because the throbbing Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL score is loud enough to rattle a buried corpse," unquote. I assume that Jonathan is either referring to Batman's theme or the Nightmare sequence music. That's probably the loudest, most throbbing part of the score that you're going to get from Batman v Superman. Those sequences could have loud and throbbing music, but that's not the entire film. The entire score is not like that. There's also a lot of really quiet moments. There's violins that are used. I mean, it's different instrumentation. And I also want to know what Jonathan thinks about this. What if that music was intended to be loud and throbbing? Because that's the way it fits a character, like an angry, vengeful Batman, or an apocalypse-like atmosphere where Darkseid has taken over the Earth through the anti-life equation. What if those sequences have that kind of music because it's trying to further the storyline and try to connect to those characters and what they're going through in the moment? What if that's a storytelling choice? Can it not be loud and throbbing then? I mean, I guess it goes back to the why are you dictating how Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer's score needed to be? Maybe they were actually trying to tell a story through their music. Let's see. Also, let's get back into Jonathan's review. He writes, quote, "I'm a lifelong comic book reader who is generally sympathetic to comic book movies," and he hyphenated comic book movies, he also hyphenated comic book, which is the first time I've seen that. I typically will see comic book and comic book movies as all separate words. That's interesting. And he writes, "And even liked Man of Steel. Batman v Superman made me want to yell at the Justice League to get off my lawn," unquote. The only times I've personally ever had a reaction that is somewhat similar to Jonathan's here to a film, it was both when I saw the film AI and the film The Lost World, the Jurassic Park sequel, the number 2. Both of which happen to be directed by Steven Spielberg. I do carry a little bit of a Steven Spielberg grudge about those those films. I'm still working through it. But I also kind of don't care. Like, I watched them, I didn't care for them. I haven't watched them since. I saw them once, and I never went back to rewatch. I remember seeing The Lost World on my birthday, one of my birthdays, went with some friends to go see it. And I actually walked out of the theater because I disliked it so much. When the T-Rex was like running through the streets of the city, I was so disappointed in humanity. The fact that like we resurrected Jurassic Park and then we let them loose in a city. I was like, this makes humanity look dumb. And then of course AI, I don't want to spoil too much of that film, but it just goes on and on and on and on. And I couldn't deal with it. But I also don't have this like really intense anger at those films that some people seem to have for Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. I didn't like those films. I'm not going to see them again. I don't want to waste hours of my life rewatching something I didn't like, but I also don't carry around this like intense hatred for it like some of these people do. So I just find that interesting. Like, why can't some people just say, I didn't like BBS, and then move on with their lives? I guess I don't understand that. All right, let's continue on. Jonathan writes, quote, "The premise, comma, if it matters," unquote. And I can't believe a film critic just wrote, "The premise, if it matters." Of course it matters. That's your entire job as a film critic. And I'm sorry if I'm raising my voice, but it's so unbelievable to me that somebody would be like, "The premise, if it matters." Of course it does. In my opinion, one of the basic aspects of being a film critic should be analyzing whether or not the premise of a film works. That's your job. So you have to determine, I think, in my opinion, as a film critic, the premise will always matter. In any film, good or bad, the premise matters. The job of a film critic, in my opinion, is whether or not that critic thinks that the premise worked. Did the premise do a good job to tell the story? Did the premise work with the characters and the storytelling and everything that goes on with it? The premise always matters, but the job of a film critic is to decide whether or not the premise works. That's my opinion. I'll put it back out here. This question I'm dealing with while we do this project. Is there a difference between a film critic and a film reviewer? I guess it would be a good time to put that question back out in case anybody has any thoughts or an answer to that question. Jonathan also goes on to say, quote, 18 months have passed since the 9/11-esque ending of Man of Steel, in which two warring Kryptonians reduced much of Metropolis to rubble. An early flashback in Batman v Superman replays that melee from human scale, acknowledging but hardly allaying the criticism that superhero films have become stunningly casual about the mass destruction they depict. Unquote. I'm surprised that Jonathan doesn't give Batman v Superman any actual kudos for this. He talks about it, but he doesn't say, hey, that's actually really refreshing. But it seems like that's what he's saying, but he never does it. He points out that BVS actually acknowledges that large-scale destruction happens in superhero films, which is treated very casually in the genre, and I would probably say by most of the Marvel movies. But Jonathan doesn't seem to treat this as a plus for the film, and that he seems to have a hard time saying that BVS did something well or unique or commendable. So I think that's a little bit interesting, personally. All right, I'm going to go back into the chat and see what some folks are saying. Mask of Shy says, why is being serious shameful? It reminds me to when some use the word edgy as in having a teenager's seriousness with not true substance. Yeah, I agree. I think there are some stories that need to be treated with a certain level of seriousness, and I don't think being serious is a bad thing. I think some people have this assumption that if there are capes involved, it's supposed to be colorful and fun and goofy, and it doesn't have to be. Some of the best superhero films are not that way. So it's hard for me to understand that. Let's see. Dennis makes the point, they did try to replicate Christopher Reeve in a Superman film, and it's called Superman Returns, and people hated it. Yeah, they did try that. That was a thing that they attempted to do to recapture some of that magic. And it just didn't work for the modern audience. And it just didn't work for the story they were trying to tell. Some of the stuff I think was cut and reworked a little bit. Coming from Warner Brothers, that's so surprising. I'm shocked. But I think there was a whole story about finding the Kryptonian rubble or whatever that Superman was, he was going on that journey. And that would have been really cool. But they decided to go with something else. It was kind of a rehash of another Christopher Reeve movie. But anyway, yeah, they did try it. So to want to try to put out the idea that Christopher Reeve would be spinning in his grave, I don't know. I think Christopher Reeve would have been possibly open. I mean, it's hard to say. We'll never know. But would he have been open to a new retelling? What would he have thought about Henry Cavill's Superman and what he was going through? He appeared on Smallville, so he was open to other interpretations of Superman. So I think if Christopher Reeve was, I think we all should be. Let's see. Yeah, so Dennis says, Snyder, well, has he said he's a Christian? I think he has a great respect, I think, for Christianity, but I don't know if he's ever said that. I'd be curious to know. But he compares Superman to Jesus, which is a thing a lot of, writing tends to do with making a messianic figure or a Jesus figure. I think this is enough to show he respects the character. Yeah, I would agree, Dennis. He has a lot of reverence for the character, whether or not you are a Christian or not. I think that is a very respectful thing that he did when it comes to Superman. Let's see. All right. So Sumitra says, loud and bright music in the beginning of Lois in Africa when Superman saves her, dark and mysterious music in Batman encountered by police with the criminals, and they're two different tones in one movie. Yeah, I think they're selecting segments of the score and making it appear in the writing as if that's an embodiment and a reflection of the entire score, which is completely unfair for a score that has to score 2.5 hours of a film. So I don't think that's an actual reflection of the entirety of the score, because I personally think that the Batman v Superman score It's one of my favorite film scores. It's really good. It's musically very good, and it tells a story even just within the music. If you just listen to it by yourself or by itself. I guess you could listen to itself. I guess you could listen to it by yourself if you wanted to. I do that all the time. Okay, so getting back into Jonathan's review. He writes, quote, "The world doesn't know what to make of the man of tomorrow. Is he a Jesus figure or a false god? Is he above the laws of man or its last defender?" While concerned-looking officials fret over these questions, and while talking head appearances by the likes of Neil deGrasse Tyson and Andrew Sullivan strain to lend these matters some gravity, a few people have made up their minds. A late career Batman, Ben Affleck, wincing, who believes a super being so powerful and unaccountable can't possibly be trusted. Or maybe he's just jealous. And megalomaniacal industrialist Lex Luthor, Jesse Eisenberg, Jesse Eisenbergening, which is kind of a weird thing to write, who for reasons he never articulates in fewer than 150 words wants to bring Superman to heel, and who does things delightfully like stuffing cherry Jolly Ranchers in senators' mouths. I was actually with Jonathan in most of this paragraph. I think he did a pretty good job of recapping some of the story. I mean, it sounds like a pretty interesting film, doesn't it? I mean, the way he described it sounds like a pretty great film. And it's actually pretty reflective of what the film is about. My problem with this paragraph is Jonathan's contention that Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor never articulates why he wants to bring Superman to heel. Or that he does, I guess, but Lex is too wordy about it. Is that what he's trying to say? I'm kind of unclear about this segment of the paragraph. I guess he's saying that he's describing his motivation with too many words. It's taking him too long to explain his motivation about why he wants to bring Superman to heel. So I guess Jonathan is saying that he personally needs Lex's motivation to be simplified down to under 150 words. This is a brand new argument about Lex Luthor for me. I have never heard this, that Lex actually over-explains his hatred of Superman. A lot of times when I've encountered people and discussed this film with other people, they're like, well, I didn't really understand why he didn't like Superman. They didn't really explain that. That's what I normally hear. But from what I'm reading from Jonathan, he's thinking that Lex over-explains his hatred of Superman. That's a new one. Jonathan continues on. He writes, quote, "Superman's alter ego, Clark Kent, meanwhile has settled into domesticity with Lois Lane. Although both sides of the man, rendered blankly by Henry Cavill, remain something of a cipher, which is too bad because Cavill has pulled off precisely the right kind of driven, slightly hammy Boy Scout this movie would have benefited from, but it was last summer in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., unquote." And keep in mind, this was written back in 2016. I'm just now reviewing it in 2021. Okay. So how does Jonathan, how does Jonathan say that Clark remains, quote, something of a cipher, unquote, which is actually a word that's used by Lois Lane to describe Clark in Man of Steel when she's investigating him. I'm curious about this use of cipher here. I looked it up in Merriam-Webster just to make sure I had the exact right definition so I could understand Jonathan's words a little better. So here are the two definitions from Merriam-Webster for cipher. The first one is, quote, "one that has no weight, worth, or influence," unquote. And the second one is, quote, "a method of transforming a text in order to conceal its meaning, or in simpler ways to put it, a message in code," unquote. I don't think that Jonathan, the writer of this review, could mean that Clark has no weight, worth, or influence in BVS. Because that doesn't make any sense to me. Clark goes through an extensive character arc and journey through the film, both as Clark and as Superman. Clark may not have had weight or worth to the public outside of his articles in the Daily Planet, but he has weight and worth to Lois, Martha, and even Bruce and Diana, and even Perry and Jenny to a degree since they attend his funeral in Smallville. And as far as Superman, Clark has significant as Superman. He has significant weight, worth, and influence in the world. Politicians and intellectuals debate his very existence while they're appearing on television. Superman appears before a Senate hearing for intervening in other countries like Africa. The people of Metropolis in the United States actually mourn his death. So I don't think that Jonathan is referring to that definition of cipher. Does it mean a cipher as in a method of transforming a text in order to conceal its meaning, or a messaging code? If that is the definition that Jonathan here is going for, what do we need to know about Clark that we don't know in Batman v Superman? We see the progression of his relationship with Lois. We get to see Clark working the Daily Planet with Lois, Perry, and Jenny, something that was actually promised at the end of Man of Steel and given to us. We get to see him meeting Bruce Wayne and Lex Luthor. We see him seeking advice from both Martha and Jonathan. We see him trying to work out what Superman is supposed to be now that he's a very public figure. What more could Jonathan need to know in order to understand Clark in this film? I'm not sure I totally understand what he means by referring to him as a cipher. Okay, moving on. Quote, the movie's first hour is a plot salad. Someone is framing Superman for deadly atrocities. Someone named White Portuguese is up to, well, something, giving Batman lots of reasons to look growly. Okay, I guess I should say unquote. That's where it ended. The plot point of framing Superman is hugely important. It's one of the biggest parts of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The White Portuguese is a ship, and is Batman not supposed to look growly? I always kind of thought that was kind of his thing when he's beating up criminals. I think Batman being growly is kind of his whole like raison d'etre. So I don't understand those comments. Jonathan goes on to say, quote, something fell into the Indian Ocean and Lex Luthor is trying to get an import license to bring it to Metropolis, unquote. I like how Jonathan here writes, quote, something fell into the Indian Ocean, unquote, as if that's not a hugely important part of this story. That something is green kryptonite, and it's used to manipulate Batman into creating the kryptonite spear, which he wants to use to kill Superman. But in the end, Superman actually uses it to kill Doomsday. That's not something to breeze past, Jonathan. That's not something to just refer to as something. It's a very important something, and to breeze past it is mind-blowing to me. Jonathan also writes, quote, and somehow all of this unfolds both rapidly, and then he does a little dash here. No scene seems to last more than 90 seconds, with another little dash, unquote. Okay, so I'm trying to work through this. So we're critiquing how long scenes are now. That's one of the things we're doing. Is that what we're doing? Jonathan, the writer of this review, as I understand it while reading this review, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan wants fewer than 150 words for Lex Luthor's motivation to get rid of Superman. But he wants scenes to be longer than a minute and a half. I'm a little confused as to how this works, because I was once told, I took a college script writing class, that the instructor told us that 75 words in a script would come out to about 30 seconds of a TV commercial. So if you double that to get to where Jonathan wants Lex's word count to be, so that's 150 words, that's only about a minute long. So by my calculations, and I am by no means great at math, I'm actually really bad at math, so I'm trying to figure this out. But I don't think that Jonathan's arguments here are adding up. I don't think you can both say that Lex Luthor's motivation needs to be shorter, but then also want the scenes to be longer. I don't understand how both of those things make sense. And then Jonathan continues on to say, quote, and painstakingly, because writers Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer make these strands more tangled than a superhero cape and a jet engine. Let me fix that for them. Lex Luthor is framing Superman. White Portuguese is his boat. It is bringing a hunk of kryptonite, which is poisonous to Superman, to Metropolis. Luthor wants Batman and Superman to fight. Was that so hard? Unquote. No, it's not that hard. Those are the exact plots of the film that are easily understandable as the film plays out. I don't know why Jonathan is trying to treat this as if the film didn't explain all of that to the viewer. There's nothing complicated about that from the film, and it's something you can take away when you watch it. So I don't know why he's making that seem as though the film made that difficult to understand. That doesn't make any sense to me. Also, Jonathan writes, quote, Lex Luthor is framing Superman. White Portuguese is his boat, unquote. This review, if you remember, started out with describing how Zack Snyder asked viewers not to spoil the movie. And then this reviewer spoils plot lines for the movie. Mind-blowing to me. So that's wild. I'm gonna go back to the chat to see if anybody has any thoughts. Okay, Ash790 says Snyder was raised in Christian Science. I don't know what they preach or how that works. Yeah, Christian Science is a little different from Christianity. It has Christian in the name, but it's not exactly the same thing. So that's interesting. Very interesting. Let's see. David says cipher as in not fleshed out. Yeah, well, if that's what he means by cipher, it still doesn't make any sense to me. I think Clark Kent as a character is actually pretty well fleshed out in terms of his journey. Let's see. David also says, remember there was a Marlon Brando Jor-El line about Marlon Brando. Yes. Sorry, I was reading that Marlon Brando, that's Brando. Jor-El line about Superman's enemies would hurt him by hurting his loved ones. That was in 1978, and it only came true in 2016. Very, very good point. Yeah, so we'll keep on. We'll get back into it to see what Jonathan has to say about Batman. So he writes, quote, about that Batman, he shoots bullets and disfigures criminals with a bat brand. A depiction that, along with many of the film's designs, is inspired by The Dark Knight Returns, a 1986 comic book, again, comic-book, miniseries in which writer Frank Miller portrayed the character as a graying neo-fascist, a vigilante boiled down to his predictable extremes, unquote. I would like to think, and this is just me making up assumptions, that a lifelong comic book fan would be happy to see this version of Batman appear on the screen, because Ben Affleck's Batman, as as inspired by The Dark Knight Returns Batman, is actually a very faithful adaptation of that story and that look and the way he is portrayed. So I mean, as a comic book fan myself, that makes me giddy about Batman, Ben Affleck's Batman in this film. So I'm kind of surprised that it doesn't seem like that for Jonathan, but I guess everybody has different opinions. He goes on to say, quote, that makes this take on the character the grimmest to ever appear in the movies, and the result is largely a one-note failure. All bat and no man, except for a series of bat dreams and bat hallucinations that, while most irrelevant to the plot, suggest a superhero who isn't just losing his fight, but is losing his grip, unquote. All right, so not relevant to the plot. Okay, so the nightmare sequence, we didn't get the culmination of this because Warner Brothers cut it off at the knees, but the nightmare sequence was actually supposed to foreshadow the nightmare world and what was going to happen with Superman, what was going to happen to Lois, and what was going to happen with Darkseid. It was actually supposed to point that way. It also helps us understand Bruce's worries and concerns about Superman. So that is actually relevant to the plot. The bat dreams, I guess he's also referring to the scenes that have to do with like Bruce touching the grave marker and the blood comes out, and then the man bat comes out. Those are all pointing towards the culmination of the Batman Superman fight. So that's relevant to the plot in a huge way. It's the kind of the climax of the film. Okay, so in terms of him saying, Jonathan saying all bat and no man, the idea that Bruce Wayne is representing mankind in Batman v Superman is one of the biggest and most well-written themes in the entire film. Bruce and Batman represent mankind taking on God, as represented by Superman. It's a huge chunk of Bruce Wayne's character arc. It's a huge chunk. It's why the ending monologue from Bruce is so important. Men are still good is something that Bruce has to learn about mankind and about himself, even because he witnesses the goodness of Superman, someone he thought was more alien than men. So I think that's really important to him because he comes to realize he was like Superman. He was like Clark more than he previously thought. So the fact that this says all bat and no man, the man part of Bruce in Batman v Superman is such a big deal for Bruce. So I'm very surprised that Jonathan would write that here. He goes on to say, quote, suggest a superhero who isn't just losing his fight, but is losing his grip, unquote. Yes, that's intentional from the story. I'm actually glad that Jonathan was able to follow along that line pretty well. That's the thing with Bruce. He's losing his grip. He's not abiding by his own rules anymore. Yes, that's the entire part of Bruce in the film, is that he is going down this dark path. He went into the light and now he's going further away from it. And he has to get back to it. So I agree, Jonathan. That's exactly what's happening in the film. Jonathan also writes, quote, but Affleck doesn't do much with what Snyder and his team give him, which is mostly Mortal Kombat worthy lines like, do you bleed? You will. Well, what Jonathan doesn't mention here about that Mortal Kombat worthy line is that Superman does bleed by the big Superman Batman fight. Batman uses the kryptonite spear to draw blood on Superman's face, showing that he has defeated him. Batman did take him down, and Superman would have most certainly died at the hands of Batman if it wasn't for Lois Lane's intervention. It wasn't just an empty threat of a line. It was foreshadowing. So I think it's funny that poking fun at that line is actually showing that Jonathan's not making an effort in good faith to actually analyze the film. So Jonathan goes on to say, quote, still, to say Affleck's brooding interpretation has little on, say, Michael Keaton's or Christian Bale's performances in the same role is kind of like saying E.T. the ride isn't as good as E.T. the movie. Different categories, different aims, unquote. Yes! Exactly. I've been trying to tell people that for a long time. All of those different interpretations of Batman had different aims. They were different stories. They had different character journeys, and they were made by filmmakers with different perspectives on the character. Yes, I agree with that 100%, Jonathan. Jonathan also goes to say, quote, the aim here, other than setting up the sequels, unquote. And I guess this goes back to Jonathan, what does he think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies? I really would be curious about this because that's all those movies are. They're just setups for the next movie. So I find it fascinating that a lot of people bring that up for Batman v Superman when Batman v Superman doesn't have a post-credit tease. There's nothing like that in there. So I think it's really interesting that that's one of it almost seems to me like there's so little to critique in this film that they have to cling on to something in order to say that they disliked it. That's how it kind of comes across to me. Maybe I'm making assumptions about things, but it just seems like you're grasping at something to criticize here. Let's see, which is why I think it's interesting that they would do this, because wouldn't you rather write an actual criticism? I think it's weird. Okay. Jonathan also goes on to say, quote, the aim here, other than setting up the sequels, is the fight, which, like the movie itself, feels closest to bare knuckle boxing, blunt technique, lots of thuds, no grace, unquote. Okay, hold up. Let's just ask this question. Is a fight between Superman and Batman supposed to be graceful? I thought we all wanted them to see them like drag out, punchy, what graceful? What is he talking about? Of course it's going to be brutish. Of course it's going to be the greatest gladiator match of all time. That's a weird critique. Again, this kind of goes back to I think he's just trying to find things to criticize. That's the weirdest thing to say about a Batman and Superman fight. Why is it supposed to have grace? I don't understand. I guess there is some kind of grace in a way, because when Lois steps in, Batman shows Superman mercy. So there is grace in that fight. Aha! So, so it's a weird critique to make, and it's easily rebuttable. That's not a word. Rebutted. I think that's the word. Okay, so Jonathan goes on to say, quote, "It's the centerpiece fans are apparently hungry for in droves. The movie is already Fandango's top pre-selling superhero movie ever," unquote. Well, you know what? I'm actually really glad that Jonathan included this in his review. It has really nothing to do with the actual critique of the film. It's outside of the film, and normally I'd be against that. But I really actually appreciate that he included this factoid about how successful BVS was, because that means that future readers are going to read this, and future historians of film are going to read this and be reminded that BVS was one of the most successful superhero movies ever. So I really actually appreciate that, Jonathan. Thank you for including that in your piece. All right. So Jonathan also goes on to say, quote, "And it makes plain everything I can't stand, perhaps heretically, about Snyder's aesthetic. From the rafter-rattling soundtrack," he really did not like the soundtrack, you guys, "to the overuse of grit-flecked shaky cam, to the way overuse of timeline ramping. His favorite style of slow motion, which makes everyone look like they're really made of really angry, silly putty," unquote. All right, I could understand the critique about the shaky cam in Man of Steel, because there actually was a lot of handheld operation in that film because Zack Snyder wanted to put the audience in Superman's position, like wanted to make us feel like we were Superman. So that was the choice there. So I could understand the shaky cam critique there. But in BVS, what is Jonathan actually talking about here? I can't think of any, like I was going through it today before this live stream, and I can't think of any egregious uses of grit-flecked shaky cam that he might be referring to here. I can't think of anything. And really, he's going to critique the cinematography in this? Really? Larry Bong's cinematography is one of the most beautiful examples of cinematography in a film. I think I'm coming to the conclusion that Jonathan is just trying to find something to critique, to the point that he's like making stuff up. I don't know what he's talking about shaky cam in here. And then he talks about timeline ramping, which that's the first time I've heard someone use the term timeline ramping. I've most often heard of it referred to as speed ramping. I'm pretty sure that's the same thing. He's just using a different name. Speed ramping actually makes more sense to me as a term. But also when he's talking about that, what is he talking about here? What is Jonathan referring to? When was there like egregious uses of speed ramping? The only instances from Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice that I can think of that would fit the criteria of timeline ramping, as Jonathan puts it, are during the Batmobile chase. Batman speeds up the Batmobile during the chase with Lex's goons, and he crashes. That awesome shot where he crashes through the window in the Batmobile and goes on top of their vehicle. And when the Batmobile goes through the window, it slows down so you can see it in all of its glory, and it speeds right back up when it makes impact to speed back up in real time. I would probably consider that speed ramping. It's just barely speed ramping because the going back into real time is just really quick. But that's one that I can think of. And the other instance would be when both of the uses are with the Batmobile, in my opinion. The other instance would be when the Batmobile, rounds the corner and Batman encounters Superman for the first time right before Superman kicks the Batmobile and it spins out. But I think that's it. I could not go back through I went back through the film and I could not find any other instances of speed ramping in the film. But that seems to be a really big critique for Jonathan here, which I think is really strange. In fact, when it makes the most Snydery sense to use speed ramping, like in the sequences with the big Superman and Batman fight, the Martha rescue, the Trinity versus Doomsday, all of those sequences play out in real time with zero speed ramping shots. So when Snyder could have used it, he didn't. And if I'm correct, which I think I am, but let me know if I'm not, I don't think we see Snyder use speed ramping again until Zack Snyder's Justice League. There's a couple of examples of it in Zack Snyder's Justice League, but it's not in Batman v Superman. What is he talking about? He went really hard on the Snyder aesthetic of the grit flecked shaky cam and the way overuse of timeline ramping, when really I don't know what he's talking about. Did he just assume that? Like, did he not watch the film and he just assumed like Zack Snyder made this, so he's going to include that kind of stuff? And then he didn't actually watch the film? I'm starting to question if this guy actually watched the film. Okay, so Jonathan goes on to say, quote, when Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot, finally arrives in costume after the heroes have teamed up to fight something even moodier than Batman, the film announces it with a processed guitar riff I'm pretty sure once appeared on a Stained album. If something exciting happens during any of it, I missed it while looking at my movie-going companion to roll my eyes, unquote. It is really interesting to me that of all the things to criticize about Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Jonathan here takes issue with one of the most beloved moments of the film, which is Wonder Woman's entrance into the film. It's most commonly seen, even by haters, as one of the great superhero entrances in film history. And here, Jonathan doesn't consider it exciting. That's interesting to me. This description of that moment makes me think, once again, evidence is mounting that I think Jonathan is just trying to find things to dislike here. That's very interesting to me. Jonathan goes on to say, quote, Batman v Superman should be the nail in the coffin of an entire industry strategy in which each superhero film's primary job is to lay breadcrumbs leading toward the next one, unquote. Jonathan really, he cannot get over this tease of the Justice League characters. He cannot get over this. He just can't let it go. That is so funny to me. He's mentioning it every so often in this review. I get it. Mention it once if it bothers you and let it go. Let it go, man. So the laying of breadcrumbs leading to the next film, whose industry strategy does that actually belong to? Oh, yeah, that's right. The Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this is going to be really important when we get to the end of this review. Let's just hold on to the fact that Jonathan's having some struggles with the teases to the next film. Let's just put that in your cap. All right. So Jonathan goes on to say, but as anyone who watches these movies know, nothing stays dead for long. And yet, while DC seems intent on casting its emerging franchise in the doomy, oh-so-serious mold of Snyder's films, count me out for Batman x Aquaman Crux of Vengeance. I can't fault its competitors' insistence that a movie based on a comic book might still want to be, fun, unquote. And he does comic book here without a hyphen. So he's really not even consistent writing-wise. Who is the editor on this review? There's no hyphen there. He's done comic hyphen book many times in the rest of this review, and then he does comic book with a space in between, no hyphen. That's really interesting. Okay, so I'm honestly really curious about what Jonathan's definition of fun is. So we're just going to be breaking some things down with some definitions here in this live stream. So Merriam-Webster defines it as, quote, what provides amusement or enjoyment, unquote, or, quote, a mood for finding or making amusement, unquote. So for me, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice meets those definitions of fun. I found amusement and enjoyment while watching it, and I still do it to this day every time I hit play to watch it. So I guess Jonathan might not thought it was fun, but I sure enough did. And I know a lot of people who also thought it was fun. So that's not really a critique. That's just your personal opinion. Okay, so Jonathan also goes to say, quote, when the dust from the titular bout was finally settled, or was it? It was. I walked out of Superman v Batman with an old childhood rallying cry restored. Make mine Marvel, unquote. Is anyone surprised, now that we've gotten to the end of this review, that Jonathan here from Slate is a Marvel fan? Are we shocked? Did that come as a big twist for anyone? Are we shocked? He would prefer Marvel. So this is interesting. Okay, so with that, I wonder if Jonathan's review of BVS was actually ever attempting to be objective at all. I'm genuinely surprised that he would even want to go here as a film critic. That last sentence depicts him as a Marvel fanboy. That's how it comes across to me. He said he was a lifelong comics fan, but he never named the brand. And here at the very end, he describes his childhood rallying cry as "Make Mine Marvel," which I can only conclude means that when he was saying that he was a lifelong comics fan, he has been a Marvel comics fan for all of that time. So of course he's going to find reasons to hate this film that is a DC Comics film. It's a direct competitor to the Marvel movies. But Jonathan doesn't seem to care that this review is heavily biased. It doesn't seem to bother him that he gives himself away here as a Marvel fanboy. I would personally think that as a film critic, one would want to build up some credibility as someone who could judge a film fairly. But I guess that's not something that is important to Jonathan. Why so serious? Jonathan asks. That's a good question, because given his blatant bias here, I don't know why anyone would take Jonathan's reviews of DC films seriously after this. So I guess that's going to wrap up our time reading the review. I'm going to hop in here into the chat to see if there is anything else anyone wanted to share about some of the things in here. Let's see. David says, if Superman was graceful, then I would have been right there with the people who believe he needed to try harder with telling Batman that a civilian woman is kidnapped. So there is that. Yeah, I guess a civilian woman, you're referring to Martha Kent. Let's see. Mask of Shy says, I wonder if there's a term for, quote, a shot too beautiful that it's distracting, unquote, which I think could be an interesting issue. That's a good question. Let's see. Yeah, so the crux of this review is that the entire time Jonathan is critiquing the teasers in the movie, when that's something that's all over the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all over. People love I don't begrudge them. They love the post-credit teaser. I mean, in my personal opinion, I like a film to just be a film. You have a first video, last video, and credits go to black. That's it. I prefer no credit teases, but I can't begrudge fans for getting excited about those things that tease the next movie. Good for them. That's something that is exciting to them. But there's a quandary here for Jonathan. He wants to make his Marvel, his Marvel. But everything he's critiquing many, many times in this review is something that the MCU does all the time to a ridiculous degree. So that's very interesting to me that he would deal with that. Okay, so I guess that's going to do it for this week's review and analysis from the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes, specifically here from Jonathan L. Fischer of Slate. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. If you ever have any questions about when I'm going to be live, just check this YouTube channel. I'll be scheduling live streams in advance when I am available. And I apologize that I've taken a few weeks off. I've been traveling and going to some places and was unable to live stream. So now that I'm kind of back in my usual routine, we'll hopefully have more of these on a regular basis on Sunday afternoons. If you do have a BVS review that you'd like to share that you thought was written really well, comment below and I'll share it in future video descriptions of my videos and these live streams. And I guess we're getting to the point where I'm going to need live stream Rebecca to take us out and in the live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at TheDerbyKid and on Vero at DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTVpodcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.